Hi, and welcome back to Wounded on Sixes. Today we're going to be reviewing the experimental prototype Cadre recently released by GW for the Tau Empire. This is a really good detachment. We're going to go over the detachment rule, the enhancements, the stratagems, but I'm really excited about this one because I think it really does improve a lot of the issues that Tau have right now, especially in the meta with a lot of like really tough melee armies going on right now. This is going to help give us the advantage against those melee armies, against those space marine armies, and really improve our weapons and our ability to deliver those weapons to the enemy. So first off, we're going to start with the detachment rule, which is add 6 inches to the range characteristics of ranged weapons equipped by Tau Empire models. So first off, this is going to work throughout the entire game. Awesome. This is going to work on every single unit in the codex. So Tau, Crew, Vespid, they're all going to get this ranged buff. Now you're probably non-Tau players are looking at this add 6 inches to the range characteristic and being like, so what? That's not that great. But if you're a competitive Tau player like me, you know this is an awesome buff. And this is the kind of buff that we've needed because Tau are the kind of army that lives on their space between the enemy and themselves. A lot of 10th edition has emphasized fast guns where Tau Empire have to put themselves in harm's way, hope they destroy the unit in front of them, and then somehow, some way avoid the charge. So a lot of Tau Empire has always just been about trading units for units. This is going to allow us to kind of hold tempo a little bit more because we're going to be able to have more distance between our weapons and the enemy. So let's think about what this really helps, the 6 inches. Flamers are greatly improved because now they're going to be 18 inches. Plasma guns, greatly improved because they're going to be 24 inches. Fusion blasters are going to be 18 inches. Missiles are going to be 36 inches. Accelerator burst cannons on our tanks are now going to be 24 inches. I mean, there are some weapon systems that don't really need the extra 6 inches, but I mean, we're not gonna shake a fist at them. And honestly, I think this can even make some weapons more viable. Like, let's say the fusion collider on the Ghost Keel. I've always been a big proponent of bringing the cyclic ion raker because it's got 36 inches, and with this detachment, we'll have 42, making it even more deadly from range. But now we can get 24 inches on that collider, which means we now have a full movement phase or charge phase between where a unit can shoot our ghost kill and not. And I think that's really impressive. This is also going to help things like breacher teams, which can now reach out 16 inches and maybe clear something off an objective for one of our bigger suits to get on, rather than put themselves in harm's way to clear out some chaff infantry. I mean, this is going to greatly improve the strategic abilities of the Tau Empire to dictate tempo. And I think if Tau is anything, they are a tempo army. We need to keep our opponent on the back foot. We need to keep them second guessing their decisions. We need to take advantage of their mistakes. And we need to be able to keep some distance between those armies and our guns. And adding 6 inches to every single weapon in the codex is exactly what we're looking for. Moving along to the enhancements, all of these enhancements do share basically the same ruling, except it changes out the weapon that it affects. So all of these are going to be enhancements that you're going to want to put on your crisis teams, particularly the crisis team commanders. So starting off first, we have the Supernova Launcher, which is Tau Empire model only. Essentially, you're going to be putting this on your Cold Star commanders. And this basically gives you +3 to the strength of the weapon and +1 to armor and damage. So your air burst fragmentation projector, which will now be from 24 to 30 inches with the detachment roll, will be at strength 6, -1, 2 damage with blast and indirect fire. And it's a D6 attack. So I'm not the biggest fan of indirect fire, but strength 6, -1, 2 damage on a D6 blast weapon sounds pretty good to me. if you're a big fan of indirect fire, then this is decent at strength six, 2 damage. But I think you're gonna have a little bit of trouble making it work, totally at 30 inches. But maybe, I mean, it definitely could be effective for some people. I'm not the biggest fan of indirect fire. Regardless of that, though, I mean, even direct fire, this is a pretty good enhancement for that weapon. I mean, strength six, -1, 2 damage blast is, you know, in my wheelhouse, especially at 2 damage. Going into infantry that might have a feel no pain, that could be really, really effective. Supernova launcher. Again, you're only going to put this on your Cold Star Commander. There's a couple of other ones in here that I might want to put on my Cold Star Commander, but this one is definitely an option. Then we have the thermal neutronic projector, and this is for Tau model only, essentially your crisis commanders. And this is for one Tau flamer. So it doesn't affect all the flamers that it might be equipped with, just one, but improves the strength by 2 and the armor pen and damage by 1, excuse me. So when we're looking at that, we now have a Tau flamer at 18 inches with the detachment rule. It's D6, and now it will be strength 6, -1, 2 damage. Pretty good as for a flamer, especially strength 6, 2 damage. But also, this makes it a good threat for Overwatch because now you're going to get an extra 6 inches. So now anything that comes within 18 inches of you is going to be fair game to a pretty devastating flamer attack, especially with 2 damage. If you put this in a unit that, like a Star Scythe unit, you're now also getting an extra AP if they're infantry when you target them. So this could be AP 2, 2 damage. Very effective and really good for threatening Overwatch with one of your crisis teams. I'm kind of a fan of this, and I think that this really improves that flamer, which, at strength 4 has always kind of underwhelmed me, but at strength 6, 2 damage, very, very nice. Moving along, we got the Plasma Accelerator Rifle. This is going to get, again, Tau Empire only, really for your Crisis team commanders. And this is one plasma rifle, improved the strength by 2 and the armor pen and damage by 1. So we're now looking at a 24-inch plasma with the detachment rule, strength 10, -4, 4 damage. You put this in a unit of fire knives, and all of a sudden you could be re-rolling that. It's only one shot, but that's strength 10, -4, 4 damage. Basically, making your commander have a mini rail, or not a rail gun, but a mini riptide gun on connected to it, and with no hazard to have to take as well. That's really good. And Tau has always struggled with the strength of their medium-sized unit weapons. Yes, the tanks can punch up, but a lot of everything else kind of peters out at strength 9, strength 8, giving us a strength 10 plasma, -4, 4 damage with the possibility of full rerolls. To hit is pretty good if you ask me, and I think something you're definitely going to want to include if you're running plasma fire knives, which I think just with the detachment rule alone is going to see more play with a 24-inch range on those plasmas. And then finally, we have probably my favorite, which is the fusion blades. One fusion blaster equipped to the bearer, again, your crisis commanders, and you're going to improve the attack's characteristic by 1 and the strength of the weapon by 3. That weapon also has melt of 4. So you're going to get a fusion blaster that is at 18-inch range, is going to be strength 12, it's going to be -4, and it's then going to have melt of 4. So essentially what they've built for us here is a demon breath spear, a Melta-Lance spear here, something that you would see on like a knight or something like that. So at strength 12, -4, melt of 4, we are now really punching up with one of our fusion blasters. And it's also 18-inch range with a detachment rule buff. So at 9 inches, we're now looking at a melt of 4 shots. So we're going to improve the attack characteristic by 2. So we're going to get 2 shots. Now imagine you're running this fusion blaster in your Sunforge team on your Cold Star Commander that's running quad fusions, and now one of them has the fusion blades. You are now re-rolling the wound roll of a Strength 12 Melta, but you're also re-rolling the damage roll of a Melta 4 weapon. That is very, very impressive. So imagine getting both of those wounds through within 9 inches now, because again, the range will be 18, so Melta will be within 9, instead of within 6. This vastly improves the effectiveness of Sunforge teams. And, I was kind of hoping for a crisis suit points decrease, and I think rather than do that, they gave us this detachment and these enhancements. And I think that this kind of greatly improves a lot of the issues that people have with the crisis suits. Moving along to the detachment stratagems, first off, we have automated repair drones. In our command phase, we can select one Tau Empire battlesuit unit from our army, and that battlesuit unit will regain D3 plus 1 lost wounds. I really like this because I think that this one greatly improves the sustainability of crisis suits, but not just that, but also things like the Riptide and the Ghost Keel, especially, which doesn't ignore modifiers to his hit roll. Could greatly you know get a lot of utility out of regaining wounds and not being damaged and having to take hits to their hit roll. So, you know, I'm usually not apt to use these kinds of stratagems for a CP, as CP can be very difficult to come by, especially in Tau list. There's just so many good stratagems for Tau. You're constantly using them, but I could see using this one. I think a lot of times though, automated repair like things like this are a little bit more win more. Like, if something's surviving and I'm in a good enough space where I'm spending one CP to like regain a couple of wounds on like a damaged unit, like I feel like I'm in a pretty good spot at that point. So this might be a little bit more of a win more, stratagem to me, but I can see a lot of utility in it, especially if you're using it on one of your like bigger suits, or you're trying to keep the effectiveness of a crisis team together, because once you lose a suit or two, those crisis teams can lose a lot of effectiveness because you can only bring them in units of 3 now. So I think that that's another reason why this is here, maybe more for the crisis suits than the bigger suits. But I think it's good all around. You could also use this on something like Shadow Sun as well. She's a battle suit unit, so that could be effective there. Moving along, we have the reactive impact dampeners, and then our opponent's shooting phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets. One Tau Empire battlesuit unit from our army that was selected as a target from those attacks until the end of the phase. Each time the attack is allocated, if the strength is greater than our toughness, we are -1 to wound. So this is essentially the -1 to wound stratagem ability that all armies have now, where basically if the strength is higher than your toughness, it's -1. Essentially, for most things, keeping you at being wounded on 4s at best, which is really good because the only time this really comes into effect is if you would be wounded on 3s or even wounded on 2s. This is really good for particularly the larger battle suits, I think, because Riptide's only T9. This could make them wound that Riptide on a 4-up, which is way better because now we are keeping that Riptide alive. But also, this is really good for crisis suits as well, because crisis suits are only T5, so a lot of times they are being wounded on 3s, very often by what I would consider pretty light fire at times. I mean, strength 6, 7 weapons wounding our crisis suits on three is not very good. So this could be really effective at keeping a crisis suit effective for longer. We now have the experimental weaponry in our shooting phase, a Tau Empire unit from our army that's been selected to shoot. So this is not just battle suit specific, but this is all Tau Empire units. Until the end of the phase, each time we roll a dice to determine the number of attacks, we can re-roll the result. So I'm not the biggest fan of this. I would say where this is probably best is on a Star Scythe unit running Flamers. That's, I mean, probably the best place to use this, and really the only place I would ever use this. I'm not the biggest fan of the Flamers. If anybody who's watched my channel knows that I'm not the biggest fan of the Flamers on Crisis suits, so I usually bring the burst cannons. That said, I think that this makes it much more likely that I would, because especially if you're not running the commander with the flamers as well. But I think in this detachment, if I'm thinking ahead, I would bring a Star Scythe unit with a commander that has the enhancement on his flamer, and then put this stratagem on that unit. Could be really, really effective. And I think that's really why they built this out, is for that particular scenario, to make those Star Scythes with flamers way better. And I think this does the job. I think this is could really improve the the number of attacks that you're getting on that flamer attack. Next up, we have experimental ammunition. So in our shooting phase, one Tau Empire unit from our army that has not been selected to shoot this phase, we can select one of the following to apply. We can improve the strength characteristic of ranged weapons by 1, or we can improve the strength and armor characteristic of weapons by 1, and then those weapons have the hazardous ability. There is a restriction that we cannot target this unit with the next stratagem that we're going to go over, and you'll see why. So, what do I think about this right here? I mean, this is pretty good. I'm trying to think where I'd want this the most. If I'm improving the strength and the armor pen by 1, and I'm taking a hazardous test, I probably want to use this on missile knives, fire, fire knives with missiles, full rerolls, getting out to strength 8, -2, 2 damage. That could be worth the hazardous test. The biggest issue that you have is that all of those weapons get the hazardous test. So, you could be back to blowing up your crisis unit with this. So, I think you got to be careful. Honestly, I think if you're not using it for the second ability to add the strength and pen, is just okay. The strength, adding the one to the strength characteristic could be useful, particularly for like fusion blasters on a Riptide, or Ghost Keel. Getting them up to strength 10. Also, their other weapons, getting them up to strength 9. They already have hazardous, so you might as well maybe take the extra armor pen on them too. But I would tread lightly with using this on like my fire knives, because you could have a situation where you're cyclic ion blastering yourself off the board with hazardous tests. So you got to be a little bit careful there. Moving on to the threat assessment analyzer, one Tau Empire unit from your army that's been selected to shoot. You can either give them sustained hits or lethal hits until the end of the phase, or you can give them sustained and lethals, but they also get hazardous on those weapons, and you can't use it with the experimental ammunition stratagem. So, sustained and lethals, but everything gets hazard. You know, again, I think you're looking at the same situation that you were looking at before with the experimental ammunition. Sustain one and lethals on their own is good, but getting both on something, could that be worth blowing up the unit? Possibly. I think this is really good on something like plasma knives, where you're gonna get full rerolls to and sustain and lethals. So that could be really good on 3 damage plasma weapons, getting extra hits, and then on the fire knives, getting full rerolls if the unit's at full strength. This is kind of like a built-in way to just trade your fire knife unit for somebody else's unit, and if you hazard that unit off the board, well, it was a full trade. I kind of like this one a little bit more than the +1 to the strength and armor pen. The one above is definitely has a higher floor, but this one has a higher ceiling, and I think that I'm willing to risk the hazard for a higher ceiling than a higher floor. So I kind of like the threat assessment analyzer a little bit better for taking on the hazards than I do for the experimental ammunition. Finally, we got the NeuroWeb System Jammer. In your opponent's shooting phase, just after they've targeted you for the attack, one Tau Empire Crisis unit from your army can basically get blown up outside of 18 inches. So, I mean, if there ever was we built this detachment for crisis suits built onto something here, it's this one right here. Giving them 18-inch loan op while also giving them 6 inches plus of range is basically, GW saying, yeah, we were a little too aggressive with their data sheets, and we're sorry. And I think that's what this is. I'm not the biggest fan of the 18-inch loan op. um, I guess in certain scenarios it may come up and I may use this, but chances are, I'm just going to probably just take the hit to my crisis team. um, Again, I'm not the biggest crisis team Tau guy. I mean, I like the bigger suits, I like the tanks, but if I was running a crisis heavy list, I could see using this on something like my missile knives that are going to have the most amount of range and maybe be susceptible to enemy fire because they're really good at fire supports. In conclusion, I think this is a decent detachment. I think it's better than giving us points cuts to our crisis teams. I think it opens up a lot of possibilities for Tau building. And, although a lot of the enhancements are built for crisis suits and a lot of the stratagems are built to be used on crisis suits, it's a detachment that can work for the entire codex, which I really like. It's going to mean that we can do a lot of experimentation with list building with it, and I'm excited to use it. So let me know what you think about this detachment down in the comments. Like this video if you've enjoyed it, and if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell for more info when we're putting out videos. I want to thank everybody for watching, and please come on back for more Wounded on Sixes.